Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. Just need to move that out of the way. I recorded another video earlier. Not sure which one of those will come up first. That one was more of a rant video about a specific book, but I'm hoping to make this one more general and less ranty. First of all, look, I have my Lindisfarne Gospels hoodie. The only one they had for the Lindisfarne Gospels was Matthew, so that's what I had for that. They had Matthew for this. I think it was Matthew for the Stockholm Gospels. I think that's which one was as well. But I wanted the one for Lindisfarne because that is one ones I'm currently reading about. So, talking about the Lindisfarne Gospels, I am reading Michelle P. Brown's book on the Lindisfarne Gospels. Now, it is not purely on the Lindisfarne Gospels. That's a little bit, the title is a little bit deceiving. Now, she does say society, spirituality, and the scribe. And it very much is going into the society part right now. It's talking about the island, about how the monks got there, talking about brooches you can find there, Book of Darrow, so other gospels that were created, talking about Cuthbert a bit, talking about Vikings. I know the Vikings did attack Lindisfarne. I think they lost quite a bit of, and I believe they lost quite a bit of their treasure or things like that. Not very familiar with the Viking attacks at Lindisfarne. I do know that there were attacks because they were an easy target. And I mean, a lot of the monasteries raised their own cattle and their own, I believe they did sheep as well, because they needed to be self-sufficient. They also needed to have parchment to write their gospels, to do their work in the scriptoriums. So they did have livestock, they did have valuables, and without being fighting men, they were easy targets for Vikings. So it looks like that's discussed here. It doesn't look like we get to the actual text of the Lindisfarne Gospels until almost the center of the book. A lot of it seems to be everything going on around the Lindisfarne Gospels. So I'm interested in seeing how this continues. As usual, Michelle's style is very easy to read. I'm not sure what I expected. It's not quite the way I expected it to be. It is as much a social history, it seems, as it is a history about the Gospels themselves being created. So I am interested in seeing what else you might have to say about the creation of the Lindisfarne Gospels themselves, but I guess I should have known that there couldn't have been a book this thick about the creation of the Gospels alone, because I can't imagine that there's a ton of, sorry, my mouth is really dry, a ton of documentation on just the creation of the Gospels. So I can see where she would have had to go into more the history around them, about the area, etc. So, yeah. Now, what is nice about this particular book, the way they set up the notes, instead of it all being at the end of the book, the notes, like footnote notes, are actually at the end of each chapter, which is kind of nice to only have to flip to the end of the chapter. Also means it helps me keep track of how much farther I have to go in a chapter, because I have one bookmark for my end of chapter footnotes and one bookmark for where I'm at. So it gives me a good idea of how much I have in the chapter, which is quite a bit for this chapter. So I do need to get cracking on this. But I only fairly recently, I was focusing mostly on this one, so I've only fairly recently started focusing on the Lindisfarne Gospels one. Now, at her recommendation, I had picked up this one as well, Michelle's recommendation in her book, because she said that some points she's going to reference terminology that it'd be nice, it'd probably be useful for you to have a guide of technical terms. And I am glad I picked this up because there are actually points in some of the other books that I was reading where technical terms are brought up. And this book reminds me a bit of, I have a reference guide to Middle Earth that I use when I'm trying to remember things for Silmarillion because it's been a while. That's what this reminds me of, even though it's not exactly the same. Honestly, it's nicer because it has pictures. So I actually am really glad I picked this up. There's been points where I needed questions answered, and this book had the answer for me because sometimes I've just had to try to figure out what was meant by context, and this has made things a lot more clear. There were points where I'm like, well, what's the difference between, I'm trying to remember what it was that I wanted to figure out. I can't remember now, but they do have stuff about what Book of Hours, and you can go and look up Psalter and see what the differences are, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a thin little book. It's really pretty inside. This is another Michelle book? Yeah, another Michelle book. I am glad I picked it up as a supplement to the other books I've been reading. Kind of feel like I'm almost doing a college course on illuminated manuscripts or medieval prayer life to go on in that realm. Painted Prayers. Now, okay, this book bad. Every few minutes, I had to stop paying attention to the names of books that she was referencing for saying this is where I got my information on this or whatever, because I'd be like, ooh, I want that book. This is one of them. Painted Prayers. The Book of Hours in Medieval and Renaissance Art. Now, what's cool about this, I didn't realize it when I picked it up. This is the one I told you about where the author had grown up Catholic. So has some understanding of some of the Christian culture. First of all, very pretty pictures. My only complaint about the way this is set up is that, and this happens a fair amount when you're dealing with books like this where there's pictures and there's a little blurb about it. The thing is, they'll have where she's talking, the main text, and then the second half of the page is about the picture. So I have to, go, okay, stop my brain in the main section, go and read the part about the picture, and then go back to the main section. So I can't be too tired when I'm reading this. Now, first world problems is not a huge deal. It's easy to work around. But what I like about this book is the author is trying to get you in the mindset of how they prayed these books, how they prayed these books of hours, which is really cool. This author's name is, oh, I'm sorry, they don't give an author. They give a publishing, oh, there it is, Roger S. Week, Wieck. The Book of Hours in Medieval and Renaissance Art, Painted Prayers. So they're taking examples from the Pierpont Morgan Library. Now, in here, there are examples from later than medieval, but I think a majority, enough of it's medieval that I'm keeping it for quarter two, but I won't mind if I kind of flow over to quarter three. What's cool is, for example, he's really nice in the way that he'll say, okay, here's this whole section, this chart here, this whole page here, where he says, okay, if you had the calendar, this was the kind of image it tend to have across from it. Or the gospel lessons, it would have pictures of John on Patmos, Luke, Matthew, Mark. If they were dealing with the hours of the Virgin and the infancy cycle, for Matins they'd have the Annunciation, for Lauds they had the Visitation, and so on and so forth, which is really cool. So, for example, I've been talking to my mom about other bookmarks to put in our Liturgy of the Hours books where the hours match up against what they would have had in the Book of Hours. I was like, well, it might be really cool to find pictures of illuminated manuscripts of, for example, for would be Lauds, I think, is morning prayer. Uh, so I would go and find a picture of the visitation and print out an illuminated manuscript version of that, whatever illuminated manuscript version I can find, and we could use it as a bookmark and make the book a little prettier, kind of feel like we have. It just kind of gets you more into the medieval kind of minds, but also just kind of a cool thing to have in a Liturgy Hours book, because unfortunately, they're not as pretty as they used to be. I wish that they would go back to printing these books with some of the pictures in them. I understand maybe it's more cost effective to not have all these pictures in it, but I believe that the breviary for the priest never did. It was meant to help the lay people in prayer. But it'd be kind of cool still to have those in there. So I'm going to take this really awesome chart they have here and try to match up some of their hours with the pictures and make use of that. So we'll have these nice bookmarks in here, because they mentioned that they use them kind of like bookmarks. You'd find your picture and be like, oh yeah, this is, the hour that I want to be on. So yeah, I think it's cool. It'll be very nice to have this. So I really appreciated that about this book. Now I'm in the section where he goes over the calendar, what you could expect to find in there. Not very far along in that, but he's talking about each month, what kind of pictures you might find in them. I get a little confused where he talks about calculating the time and all that. It's a little bit, because this is before the Gregorian calendar, it was a little bit confusing. I'm not sure if he hits after the Gregorian calendar. Gregorian calendar, 1572. So, yeah, the majority of this is before the Gregorian calendar. So calculated time is a little bit confusing. They have a section on gospel lessons, talks about that a bit. The hours of the Virgin. So it's just I like the way that it's going into some of these details. And takes you through the Book of Hours and explains each section. I don't know what I expected of this book, but it's really cool that that's the way it's set up. Another book that's set up similarly that I have that I probably won't be able to get into this year, it's Rachel Fulton Brown's Mary and the Art of Prayer, and this is supposed to be focusing on the hours of the Virgin in medieval and Christian life and thought. And she's also she's going into a lot of detail. So she has a whole section just on hours of Virgin in general, then about Ave Maria, antiphon and psalm, that's a big chapter, lesson and response, prayer. And she makes a point, compline, she makes a point at the beginning of the book that, again, she wants to get into the mindset of someone praying at the time, which I really appreciate. And it's something that has been while reading about Book of Hours in general, where I've been like, well, great, what was it like to pray this? What was it like to get into the medieval mind? So these two books, I really appreciate that that's what they're going into. And also I just noticed it's really fun, someone wrote their name on the bottom of this book. So definitely use book. They took good care of it. But yeah, I'm really excited about this one. I probably won't be able to get to read this one this year because look how thick. She's gone into crazy detail, and the text is not large. So I'm really interested in how she got this much out of the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin. Now, it might not have been as little back then, maybe, because if you've ever seen a modern day Little Office of the Blessed Virgin, it's teeny. It's itty bitty. So I'm really interested in how she got that much out of it. So it must have been quite a bit different than the version that we have now. By the same author, From Judgment to Passion, Devotion to Christ and the Virgin Mary, 800 to 1200. And she's talking about the growth of the cult of the Blessed Virgin. Now, cult isn't being used as in the way that you might think of cult as I don't know. Usually when you hear cult, it's more a negative faction. They would usually when they're talking about cults of the saints, they're talking about devotion to a uh, almost like a general fandom. That's not a great way of putting it, but the building of the devotion to these particular saints. There's another book that I have that is called The Cult of the Saints, which I haven't read yet. But I'm interested in reading this about the growth of the devotion to her, and there was a definite increase on the focus of her during medieval time. I think that some of that growth went hand in hand with the chivalric tradition growing. It seems to fit very much in that mindset of the heightened view of women. Wow, it's just really weird how the medieval mind worked, where they would elevate women like as being like these pure, perfect beings, while also you'd be like they're these pure, perfect beings, or they were almost treated like children in other ways. So it was just a really weird the way the medieval minds seemed to work in that way. I'm not quite sure how they made that still work in their brains. That's something maybe I need to go and look into more, but it is kind of an odd dichotomy. But this goes into the growth of that devotion to Our Lady, because it wasn't just women, it was men as well. And that devotion goes strong in the church today. So I'm interested in reading this. Now, this author is not Catholic either. I'm not sure actually if any of the authors that are writing these books are Catholic. But what I enjoy about these authors is that regardless as to their personal religion, or in the case of the person who's writing Painted Prayers, lack thereof, they are taking whatever their personal views are and they're setting them aside and being like, okay, but let's look at this from the medieval mindset. And that is amazing. That is what I feel you need to do when you're covering this kind of topic. At least to do so honestly and to do it, I don't know, in the most fair way possible. If you're going to be covering this sort of era and this sort of something that was so important to the era and their mindset, if you're trying to actually understand them, you really need to get into how they thought and why. Now, finally, this one, Book of Hours, and it looks like this one goes into specific books of hours. At points, it has full-on pages of pictures. It looks mostly like it goes into kind of like when I was reading the book about the Bible Illuminated, where it would have about sections about specific books that were illuminated, and then they would Bibles that are illuminated, and then they would go and show like a full page of pictures. That's what this one seems to be like. It'll have a little blurb about each individual book of hours, and then it'll give you, a couple pages of pictures. So it's a cool setup. I probably won't get to this one this year. It'll probably be at a different time. But this is one of those ones where it's kind of nice to read. If you don't have a lot of time, you read about one particular book of hours, you look at the pretty pictures, and then you go on and do your thing. But, sorry, my mouth is really dry today. What else do I have to say? I've really been very much into illuminated prayer right now. I feel like I have tea on my glasses. Yes, I do. So I'm really into reading about that right now, which has been great and quite fun. Let me see. Looks like my family's heading home. Yep. So I better close this up. But anyway, this is it's been really great reading about all this. Next time, I might talk about the book I'm reading about Edward III, but I can't do that right now because family's heading on the way home, and usually this is when I have my tea time with my mom. So thank you very much for joining me for another hangout talking about books, and I will see you next time, whenever that might be. God bless. Bye-bye.